Today's daf is daf Ayin Tes, and we'll start with Omer of Huna, three lines down from the top. Omer Shmuel, Hilchasa Kechananya. So we had a machlokus, if you recall, between Chananya and the Chachamim about whether or not we're choshesh lizera ha'av, whether or not we have to consider the father's relationship to the offspring. According to Chananya, since we hold choshen lizera av, therefore in the case of osov es beno, if you were to slaughter the father and its offspring on the same day, you would violate the law. According to Chachamim, ein choshen lizera av, and therefore in that case that we described, you would not be chayav. And now Rav Huna is telling us in the name of Shmuel that we paskin like Chananya. V'az the Shmuel l'tamei, and we're going to show elsewhere where Shmuel paskins like Chananya, Desnan, and now we study the sugya of breeding and mating two animals of two species, which is called Kilayim, and this is a Mishnah in the eighth parak of Kilayim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hanolodim min hasus. So if a female horse gives birth to what we call in our language a mule, which means that the father is a donkey, the mother is a horse, and when they mate, the offspring is called in our language a mule. In the Mishnah's language, it's called Hanolodim min hasus, Aval pisha aviem chamor. So you have a case where the mother is a female and the father is a male. The mother is a horse, a female horse. The father is a male donkey. Is mutarim ze bazeh, meaning that if the offspring, let's say there are two, a male and a female offspring from this relationship between a female horse and a male donkey, then you can mate them together because they belong to the same exact species. They're identical. We'll see that there's a chiddush here, even if, let's say, you would say that the male part had like a conjugal relationship with the female part that's from uh, two different parents, but in any event, they're identical. And Mutarim Zeba said, oh, Aval, but no. Hanoladim min achamor im hanoladim min asus. So let's say in this particular case, you have a female donkey and you have a male horse. No. I'm sorry. Hanoladim, a female donkey with a female horse, right? So now we would say that at this point, you can breed the two together, but it says no. Asurim. You cannot mate the horse that was born to a female with a donkey that was born to a female. Now the question is, why not? And apparently the answer is that since the mother was a horse, the father was a donkey, therefore, if we perhaps disqualify, or shall we say, if we're not concerned with the Zera Ha'av, so then in this case, what's the Isser here of Kilayim? So the Gemara explains, Omer Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel Zu Divrei Rabbi Yehuda the Omer Ein Choshen Lezera Ha'av. So Rabbi Yehuda does not consider the father's seed in regard to animals. And therefore, if you have two mules and the mothers are of different species, and that's called the mother was a donkey of this one, and the mother of this one was a horse. So they're coming from horse and donkey, which is two different species. That again, the whole problem here is because ein choshin lezera'av. If you would add to the equation the zera ha'av, then you would have no problem over here. But if you focus exclusively on the mother, so now you're mixing a donkey with a horse, because this one has a mother who's a donkey. This one has a mother who's a horse. That's called nolodim min achamor, nolodim min asus. And therefore, by focusing exclusively on the mother, you now have two different species, horse and donkey, and therefore there's an Easter Kilayim. Say Shmuel, Avol Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim are going to disagree, and the reason for that is because Chosheshin Lezera Ha'av. Now we add to the equation the fathers, and therefore Kol Mine Prodos Achas Heim, right? Let's say you're right. One, let's call it a mule, was born to the mother who was a horse, and the other was born to a mother who was a donkey. But nevertheless, you can mate them because they're considered one species according to the Chachamim, and that's why all mules, all predos, are considered identical blends, because again, if you introduce the male, so then you mamish have the exact same combination. You got a female horse and a male donkey, with a male horse and a female donkey. So again, all you did was you changed the gender of the mother with the father. But as far as the offspring is concerned, it's exactly the identical combination of horse and donkey. But again, that only applies if I introduce into the equation the zera ha'av. And Shmuel says, Man chachamim, who are these chachamim that rejected Rabbi Yehuda and hold choshishin lezera ha'av Chananyahu? Don't choshishin lezera, right? We saw by Osav Espino, Chananya takes into consideration the father, and therefore, if you shecht both the father and its offspring on the same day, you violate the lav. Bahai, and therefore, with regard to kilayim, bar susi v'chamora. Hi bar susi v'chamora, hi bar chamra v'susia. You notice that the words change in the order. There's susia v'chamor, right? The word susia here refers to the mother who's a female horse, and chamra refers to the male donkey that mated with the female horse. Vahai and the other offspring came from chamra, which is a female donkey. So you see how we switched from a female horse to a female donkey, and the male was a horse. So again, you've got donkey and horse, donkey and horse. It's the exact same combination because we consider Zera Av. If we'd only focus exclusively on the Zera Ha'em, on the mother, then you've got one that's a product of a female donkey, the other is a product of a female horse, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda holds that you cannot mate them. But if I hold Chayshin and Lezera Av, which is Chananya's Shita in Osav Espino, then Kulu Chadaminahu, they're all the same species, because it's always a product of a mixture between a donkey and a horse, whether it's the donkey is the female mother or whether it's the horse that's the female mother. In the other case, it doesn't matter. It's always a combination of these two parents, one of which is a donkey and the other is a horse. Iboilahu. Mifshat pshita leila Rabbi Yehuda ein choshen lezera av odilma safuke mesafkale. Rabbi Yehuda's shita that we're not worried about, we don't concern ourselves with the seed of the father in the animal case. Does he mean it in vados, meaning he's definite about that, or perhaps he's vacillating about that? He's not certain about it. L'maynaf gemina. So the Gemara wants to know, if you have such a suffix, there must be a difference lahalacha in Rabbi Yehuda's frame of reference. And it makes a difference. The mishrei pri means the offspring, im ha'em. Another im ha'em means with the species of the mother. So let's say, for example, he gives a case here. Again, we're always talking about a mule who's the product of a mate between a horse and a donkey. And this mule, in this case, was born to a female horse. Now, let's say you have another mule that was also born to a female horse. So let's not jump the gun and say, well, those are two identical species because the father of one was a horse and the father of the other was a donkey. So if we're going to say that Rabbi Yehuda was, what's the language of the Gemara? He was mifshat poshetle, he was absolutely certain that we don't consider it all the father. So who cares that the father of one offspring was a horse and the father of the other offspring was a donkey? It's irrelevant because the mother of this one was a horse and the mother of this one was a horse, and therefore you have identical species if ein choshen l'zera'av. But if on the other hand, so that's called iyamrit mifshat pshitole, then pri im ha'em shari, right? In other words, all we care about is the identification of the mother, and in both these mules, the mother was a female horse, so you could certainly do. But if you're going to tell me Sifuki Masafkale, that Yehuda was in doubt and he didn't know whether we should consider the father's seed or not, then Priyama Aim Asur, then in the case of two offsprings from a mother who is a horse, but one of them had a father who was a horse, the other had a father who was a donkey, then since we go according to one side in the suffix of Rabbi Yehuda, and we consider the seed of the father, then you have here a kilayim of two different species. You've got a horse and a donkey. Toshma. So we quoted a Mishnah earlier. Now we're going to go back and re-examine that Mishnah and see if we can come to a conclusion as to whether Rabbi Yehuda was Vaday or Safek. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kolan Olodim in Asus Afal Pi She'avihem Mutarim Avim Chamor Mutarim Zebazet. Now, what exactly is going on over here? Rabbi Yehuda discovers America and he has to tell me that if you have an offspring of a mother who's a horse and a father who's a chamor, times two, right? Clone it. You're allowed to mate them together. They're exactly identical. Hefi dummy. What's the case? If you're talking about the offspring of a female horse and another offspring of a female horse, and not only that, each offspring had a father called Mr. Chamor, a donkey. Is Strichel a Meimar? Would I ever entertain the possibility that you're mating two different species when each one of these two offsprings is exactly identical? They both have a mother who's a horse and a father who's a donkey. So obviously that can't be the case that Rabbi Yehuda is addressing. Ella but rather what do we have to assume? Lav, shouldn't it be the following case? The avudahai sus vavudahai chamor. Although both of these offsprings, these mules, have a mother who's a horse, one of them had a mother who's a horse, I'm sorry, a father who's a horse, and the other one had a father who's a donkey. And now Rabbi Yehuda has to analyze this case because in this very case, the Chachamim would say that you're not allowed to breed them together because this one's father is a horse and this one's father is a donkey. They're two different species. And yet Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ketani mutarim alma." We see pshita mifsha pshita. In other words, obviously Rabbi Yehuda was totally certain about the fact that we don't consider the seed of the father, and therefore he's going to allow the mixed breeding of two offsprings whose both of whom's mother was a horse, even though one of them had a father who's a donkey and the other one had a father who's a horse, because ein choshen l'zerav b'toras vadai. Lo, the Gemara rejects it. Li'olam, I'm going to go back to our original presentation, which we rejected outright. Avudahai chamor, avudahai chamor. They're identical. They both have mothers who are horses, and they both have fathers who are donkeys. And then you ask me, what do I need this? I mean, they're exactly identical. Each one is the son of a female horse and a male mule. So they're identical. So do I need Rabbi Yehuda to tell me that you're allowed to mix breed them? The Gemara answers, Ma'odetema, osi tzad desus u'mishtamish b'tzad ha'chamor, v'tzad ha'chamor mishtamish b'tzad ha'chus. Kamash. Okay, now we get into this whole, the Gemara uses a very, kind of nice terminology, mishtamish, but the Gemara is talking about conjugal relations. And we have to see, which song, right? Each of these offsprings is a hybrid, right? There was a Spanish word for that. I forgot what it is. Anyway, so each one is a hybrid. Now, it's true that they're both identical, but when you mate them, you might be made, right? So each one has a tzad sus and each one has a tzad chamor. So it could be that when you mate them, the tzad chamor of this one is having a relationship with the tzad sus of this one. Kamashmal, no, Rabbi Yehuda wants to tell me that we look at the offspring as one whole entity. We're not going to divide it up and say, well, this part of this and this part is that. And since they're identical, there's no prohibition of kilai. Toshma. So the original proof to establish Rabbi Yehuda was Vadai falls by the way. So now we have to come up with another proof. And we have a brisa that says Rabbi Yehuda Omer Pirda Shetava. Now, what do you do if a mule is in heat? So ein marbin oleh lo sus velo chamor elamina. So a pirda is a mule, a hybrid of a horse and a donkey. And Rabbi Yehuda is going on record as saying that the only mate that would be permissible would be an identical mule, meaning a mule, obviously of the other gender, but a mule that is mina. Mina means if the pirda is a sus, then with a sus. If the pirda is a chamor, with a chamor. I don't get it. If Rabbi Yehuda holds that b'toras vadai, we're absolutely certain that we're not concerned at all with the father's seed, is then why does he say Amar bin oleh lo sus v'lo chamor liraba oleh mina de'ima? Why is he concerned in only allowing mating one pirta with another pirta because they have the exact same lineage of sus chamor from both sides, the mother and the father? We're not concerned about the father. Rabbi Yehuda holds ein choshen l'zera av b'tor's vadai, and therefore all we care about is the female. So if the females are both, let's say, sus, then we should be able to be mate them. Now, we're about to introduce, in order to reject this, a sugya called simonim, which means, let's say we don't know what the species is. We can't tell the difference whether this mule came from a horse, came from a donkey. So we have simonim. We have certain physical characteristics that will allow us to identify. So the Gemara says, Lo yadina mina de'ima ma'idnina. The case that Rabbi Yehuda prohibits is because we cannot identify the mother species. We don't know whether she was produced by a female horse that mated with a donkey or by a female donkey that mated with a horse. So we know it's a product of a horse and a donkey, but we don't know, in which direction. So due to this doubt, whether this mule is classified as entirely as a horse or entirely as a donkey, it cannot be mated one with the other. So the Gemara asks, "Vaha ela mina ktani," right? You're only allowed to mate it with her own min, meaning a male mule. Now, if we're dealing with a case of a mule and we cannot identify the mother, so how could Rabbi Yehuda allow her to mate with another mule when we don't know and we can't identify whether this mule's mother was a horse or a donkey? Ein marbin oleh lo min sus v'lo min chamor lefi she'ein yodim b'mina. Well, so now the Gemara asks the question that I mentioned before, v'livdok b'simonim, if you cannot identify whether it's a mule from a horse or a mule from a donkey, then Omar Abaye has this physiological scientific proof. Avi kole, if its voice is deep like that of a donkey, then we know its mother was a donkey. Baracham. But sniff kole, if it has a very thin, shrill voice, which is the equivalent to that, right? When a donkey brays, it's a very thick kind of a voice, very deep voice, whereas a horse neighs, and it's more of a soft kind of shrill. V'yomer Rav Papa, Rav Papa also gives another siman to identify whether or not it's an offspring of a female horse or the offspring of a female donkey. Rav Ravan Udne. Udne means ears. The ears are Rav Ravan are very large. Vizutrid gnuvte, but its tail is very short. Barcham, and then we know that the mother was a donkey. But Zutrin Udne, if it has small ears, Viraba Guvte, but it has a long tail, then Barasusi, we know that its mother was a horse. So the Gemara answers, Hachamayas Kinan, what's the case here? Bilemis, Vigidemis. There's no sound, it's mute, and there's no looking at its tail, because the tail was amputated. So my havila. So at the end of the day, what's our final conclusion? Does Rabbi Yehuda have a suffix of choshen l'zerav, or he's certain that ain't choshen l'zerav? Toshma, the Omer of Huna Bereid Rav Yoshua Kol Modim Bepri Im Ha'em Sha'asur. Everybody agrees that if you have the product of a crossbreed, then we can't uh, we can't mate them together, even though they both have a mother from that species. Shmaminos, if Fuki Mesafkali Shmamino must be the Rabbi Yehuda's in doubt, he doesn't know, he vacillates back and forth whether we're concerned with the father's seed. Amalei Rav Abba L'Shamei. Rabbi Abba says to his shamis, I mi ailis li kundaisa b'rispak. Let's say you want to take two mules and hitch them to my wagon together. And the Torah says, right, that you're not allowed to plow a field with two animals simultaneously that belong to two different species, then make sure that when you hitch together from me, two mules, make sure that they have the same features. Their ears are either large or small, their tails, etc., etc. We see clearly that Rabbi Abba is not concerned with the father's seed. Yeah, because these simonim will only tell you about the female. They don't tell you anything beans about the male. And therefore, how could this solve Rabbi Abba's problem?